stop scrolling if you ever go hiking. Because in this video, I'm sharing 3 bone-chilling stories of encounters in the wild that will make your skin crawl. From unexplained noises to terrifying pursuits, these real-life tales reveal the hidden dangers lurking on what you thought were safe paths. Prepare to be unnerved, because nature isn't always as friendly as it seems. There is a universal pull to the wild, a siren song that calls to a primal part of our soul. It's the desire to disconnect from the noise of our lives and reconnect with something more fundamental. We hike to find peace in the quiet rustle of leaves, to feel the satisfying burn in our muscles as we conquer a challenging summit, to stand at a scenic overlook and feel small in the grand silent cathedral of nature. In these moments, the wilderness feels like a sanctuary, a place of profound beauty and honest simplicity. But for those who venture deep enough, for those who truly embrace the silence and the solitude, there is another side to that wilderness. In the vast, lonely spaces where the trails fade and the presence of humanity is just a distant memory, a different kind of feeling can take root. It's the unsettling awareness that you are not just an observer of nature, but a participant, subject to its ancient and often unknowable rules. The stories you are about to hear come from that hidden place. They are real-life accounts from hikers who stepped off the familiar path and into a world of deep and unnerving mystery. They challenge our perception of the wild as a safe and predictable space, and they serve as a chilling reminder that sometimes, when you stare into the deep, dark woods, something stares back. My name is Alex, and for most of my adult life, the mountains have been my church. I work a high-stress job in finance, a world of concrete towers, ringing phones, and the ceaseless pressure of numbers on a screen. The wilderness is my antidote. Every few months, I pack my gear and head for the Sierra Nevadas, disappearing for a week at a time to hike, to climb, and to feel the reassuring weight of solitude. I'm an experienced hiker, meticulous in my planning and confident in my abilities. I faced down bears, navigated treacherous weather, and spent countless nights alone under the stars. I've always believed that with the right preparation and a healthy dose of respect, the wilderness is the safest place a person can be. A single trip on a trail I had hiked half a dozen times before taught me how terribly wrong I was. The trail was the Bishop Pass route, a stunningly beautiful but challenging trek that winds its way through the granite heart of the mountains. I had planned a 5-day solo trip, a simple out-and-back journey to a series of alpine lakes that shimmered like jewels in the high country. The first 2 days were idyllic, a perfect postcard of a backpacking trip. The weather was flawless, with a brilliant, cloudless sky and a gentle breeze that kept the summer sun from feeling too intense. The familiar rhythm of the trail, the crunch of my boots on the dusty path, the rhythmic swing of my poles, the steady beat of my own heart was a calming meditation. I felt strong, capable, and completely at peace. The mountains were welcoming me back, and I felt at home. The first sign that something was wrong was so subtle I almost dismissed it as a trick of the altitude. I was on the 3rd day of my hike, ascending a series of long, grueling switchbacks toward the pass. I had stopped to catch my breath, leaning against a massive granite boulder when the world went silent. It wasn't just quiet. It was a total and absolute absence of sound. The gentle breeze that had been whispering through the pines ceased. The chirping of the marmots on the rocks around me vanished. The distant call of a hawk I had been listening to for the past hour was snuffed out. It was as if someone had thrown a thick, soundproof blanket over the entire valley. The air itself felt heavy, dead. I stood there, holding my breath for what felt like a full minute. The silence was so profound it was disorienting. Then, as suddenly as it had stopped, the sound returned. The wind sighed through the trees. The marmots chirped, and the hawk let out another cry. It was as if someone had pressed the play button on the world again. I shook my head, a nervous laugh escaping my lips. It had to be a strange acoustic phenomenon, the way the sound waves moved between the granite walls of the valley. A logical explanation. I shouldered my pack and continued my climb, but a small, cold seed of unease had been planted. That afternoon, I set up camp beside a beautiful, unnamed lake just below the pass. The water was a stunning shade of turquoise, and the jagged peaks surrounding it were reflected perfectly on its glossy surface. As I was filtering water by the lake's edge, I heard the second strange sound. It was a faint, metallic scraping noise coming from high up on the scree slope on the far side of the lake. Scrape, drag, scrape. It was a rhythmic, deliberate sound. My first thought was another hiker, perhaps someone scrambling up the loose rock. But there was no one there. I scanned the entire slope with my binoculars for 10 minutes. The sound continued, steady and methodical, but the slope was completely devoid of life. There were no mining operations in this protected wilderness area. No construction, nothing that could explain the sound of metal on rock. It continued for about an hour, then stopped as abruptly as it had begun, leaving me in a silence that now felt watchful and menacing. I tried to rationalize it away. Maybe it was a rock slide far away, the sound echoing in a strange way. Maybe it was an animal, a bear digging for roots, its claws scraping against buried rocks. But the sound had been too regular, too mechanical. As the sun began to set, casting long, eerie shadows across the valley, I felt a growing desire to not be alone. I built a small, nervous campfire, something I rarely do when hiking solo, needing the primitive comfort of its light and warmth to push back the encroaching darkness. The third sound came later that night, and it was the one that finally shattered my carefully constructed sense of calm. I was lying in my tent, drifting in and out of a light, restless sleep when I was woken by a low, resonant hum. It was a single, pure musical note, like a cello being played in the distance. But the sound was distorted, and it held for an impossibly long time without wavering. It seemed to be coming from everywhere at once, vibrating through the ground and up into my bones. It was a beautiful sound in a way, but it was also deeply, fundamentally wrong. There was nothing in nature that could produce a sound like that. It rose in volume slowly, held its perfect, unwavering note for what must have been 5 minutes, and then it faded back into silence. I lay there in my sleeping bag, my heart pounding, every nerve on high alert. The peace of the wilderness was gone, replaced by annoying, creeping dread. I knew, with a certainty I couldn't explain, that I was not welcome here. The next morning, I made a decision. I was going to cut my trip short. I would hike back out the way I came. The thought of spending 2 more nights alone in this valley, with its unnatural silences and impossible sounds, was unbearable. I packed up my camp in a frantic hurry, my eyes constantly scanning the surrounding ridges. The beautiful landscape that had brought me so much peace just 2 days before now looked like a trap. Every rock seemed to hide a watching eye. Every shadow seemed to hold a waiting threat. I had been hiking for about an hour, making good time on the downhill trail when I saw the markings. They were carved into the trunks of the large pine trees that lined the path. They were fresh, the raw, white wood of the interior of the bark stark against the dark exterior. The symbols were strange. Geometric patterns I had never seen before, spirals that turned in on themselves, complex lattice of intersecting lines, and a recurring symbol that looked like a single open eye. They weren't trail markers. They weren't the work of a random hiker with a pocket knife. They were deliberate, and there were dozens of them, appearing on the trees every 100 feet or so. It felt like I was walking through a territory that had been claimed by something unknown. My pace quickened, my unease now bordering on panic. I just wanted to be out of there. I was hiking through a narrow section of the trail, with a steep, rocky canyon wall on one side and a sharp drop-off on the other, when the clicking started. It was a soft, rhythmic sound, like 2 stones being tapped together. Click, click. It was coming from the woods just ahead of me, around the blind corner. I stopped, my trekking poles held in front of me like feeble weapons. The clicking stopped too. I stood there for a full minute, my ears straining, but there was only silence. I took a tentative step forward. The clicking started again, this time from behind me. I spun around, my heart leaping into my throat. The trail behind me was empty, but the clicking was undeniable, coming from just off the path, in the dense undergrowth. Click, click, click. And then I heard it from the front again, just around the corner. I was caught between them. Whatever was making the noise, it was in two places at once, and it had me cornered. I did the only thing I could think of. I yelled, "Who's there?" My voice sounded small and thin in the vast emptiness. The clicking stopped instantly. For a moment, there was a profound silence, and then a new sound began. It was a low, guttural chattering, a rapid series of clicks and pops and whistles, like an insect the size of a man. And it was moving, crashing through the undergrowth on the slope above me, keeping pace with me as I started to run. It was a frantic, clumsy run, my heavy pack throwing me off balance, my boots slipping on the loose rock of the trail. The chattering sound stayed with me, a constant, terrifying presence just out of sight. I didn't dare look up the slope. I just focused on the trail ahead, my lungs burning, my mind a white-hot scream of pure terror. I finally burst out of the narrow canyon and onto a more open stretch of trail. I risked a glance back, and I saw it. It was only for a second, a fleeting glimpse of movement between the trees, but it was enough to burn itself into my memory forever. It was tall, impossibly tall and thin, its limbs long and jointed like a stick insect's. Its skin was a pale, chalky white, and it moved with a jerky, unnatural, stop-motion gait that defied the laws of physics. It wasn't an animal. It wasn't human. It was something else, something ancient and wrong that belonged to the deep, dark places of the earth. I didn't stop running for a mile. I ran until my legs gave out and I collapsed on the side of the trail, gasping for breath, my body shaking uncontrollably. I lay there for a long time, convinced that at any moment, the pale figure would step out of the woods and finish what it had started. But it never came. The sounds were gone. The forest was just a forest again. I hiked the rest of the way back to my car in a state of numb, exhausted shock. I didn't stop to rest. I didn't stop to eat. I just walked, my eyes fixed on the path, my mind replaying that fleeting, horrifying glimpse over and over again. I made it back to the trailhead just as it was getting dark. I have never been so happy to see a parking lot in my entire life. I drove straight back to the city, the 9-hour drive a blur. I didn't tell anyone what happened. Who would believe me? They would say I was dehydrated, that the altitude had made me hallucinate. They would have a dozen logical explanations for the thing I knew, with every fiber of my being, was real. I don't go to the mountains anymore. My sanctuary has been violated. The silence I once craved now feels menacing, a void that could be filled at any moment by a sound that doesn't belong. I am back in my world of concrete and noise, and sometimes I think I am more alone now than I ever was on that mountain, because I know what lurks in the deep, quiet places of the world. I know that the strange sounds you hear on the wind are not always just the wind. And I know that when you walk in the wilderness, you are never, ever, truly alone. My name is Maya, and I'm a wildlife photographer. Or at least, I used to be. For me, the wilderness was never just a backdrop. It was the subject of my art, my life's passion. I've spent months at a time alone in some of the most remote corners of the world, patiently waiting in a blind for days just to get a single perfect shot. I am, by nature, a quiet and observant person. My job requires me to notice the smallest details, the subtle shift of light through the trees, the faint track of an animal in the mud, The almost imperceptible tensing of a muscle that signals a creature is about to take flight. I've always prided myself on my ability to see what others miss. But on one trip, deep in the foggy, autumn-haunted forests of the Appalachian Mountains, my own skills were turned against me, and I became the subject of a terrifying, unseen observer. My project was to document the black bear population of a specific isolated region of the mountains as they prepared for winter hibernation. I have secured a special permit to camp in a remote area for 2 weeks. My plan was to set up a base camp near an old, dilapidated fire tower that I had seen on a topographical map. The tower, long since abandoned by the Forest Service, would provide a perfect, elevated vantage point for the panoramic landscape shots I needed to complement my wildlife photography. The hike-in was arduous, a long, steep climb on an overgrown trail. The forest was a beautiful, melancholic world of decaying leaves, damp earth, and ancient, moss-covered trees. A thick, persistent fog clung to the mountains, muffling all sound and lending the woods a ghostly, ethereal quality. I found the old fire tower, a rusted skeleton of steel rising from a small, rocky clearing. I set up my camp a safe distance away, a small, sturdy tent that would be my home for the next 2 weeks. The first day was spent scouting locations, identifying game trails, and setting up a small camouflage blind near a creek where I hoped to catch the bears fishing. The feeling was one of perfect, creative solitude. I was in my element, completely focused on the work ahead. The feeling of being watched started on the second day. It wasn't a sudden, dramatic event. It was a slow, creeping sensation, a subtle shift in the atmosphere of the forest. I was sitting in my blind, motionless for hours, when I got the distinct, prickling feeling on the back of my neck that signals you are no longer alone. I slowly scanned the surrounding woods through my camera's telephoto lens. I saw nothing, but the feeling persisted, an undeniable weight of another's gaze. I told myself it was just a deer, or maybe even a bear, watching me from a distance, hidden in the thick undergrowth. It was a normal part of being in the wild. Later that afternoon, back at my campsite, I found the first piece of concrete evidence that my feeling was more than just paranoia. I was gathering firewood when I saw it near the edge of the clearing, a single perfect footprint in a patch of soft mud. It was not mine. My hiking boots had a deep, aggressive tread pattern designed for rugged terrain. This print was from a bare foot. It was long and slender, with clearly defined toes, and it was impossibly out of place. The ground was cold and damp, littered with sharp rocks and twigs. No hiker, no sane person, would be walking barefoot in these woods. I stared at the print, a cold knot of fear tightening in my stomach. I took a photo of it, then I erased it, kicking dirt over the print until it was gone. I didn't want the evidence. I wanted the feeling to go away. That night, sleep was a long time coming. I lay in my tent, my ears straining to hear every snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves over the sound of the wind. I felt exposed, vulnerable, my thin nylon tent a fragile, useless barrier against the vast, dark woods and whatever was out there with me. The next day, I tried to push the fear to the back of my mind and focus on my work. I spent the morning in my blind, and while I didn't see any bears, I did manage to get some beautiful shots of a red fox. That evening, back at camp, I was reviewing the day's photos on my laptop. I was zooming in on one of the fox pictures, checking the focus, when I saw something in the background. Deep in the shadows, between the dark trunks of 2 large oak trees, was a shape. It was blurred by the shallow depth of field, an out-of-focus, vaguely human-like silhouette. It could have been a trick of the light, a strangely shaped tree stump, a classic case of pareidolia where the mind sees patterns that aren't there. It was just plausible enough to be deniable. But I knew what I was looking at. I was looking at my observer. The subtle unease I'd been feeling for the past 2 days now blossomed into full-blown terror. This wasn't an animal. This was a person. A person who was out here, in the middle of nowhere, walking barefoot and watching me from the shadows. I didn't sleep at all that night. I sat in my tent with my largest knife in my hand, listening, waiting. The next morning, I awoke from a light, exhausted doze to find that my camp had been visited. Nothing was stolen. Nothing was broken, but things had been moved. My spare camera batteries, which I had left charging on my small solar panel, had been taken off the charger and arranged in a perfect, neat circle on a large, flat rock. My spare canister of cooking fuel had been moved from beside my tent to the center of the clearing. It was a message, a clear and terrifying demonstration. I was here while you slept. I can touch your things. I can get to you whenever I want. And then I saw the gift. Sitting on top of my backpack, which I had left just outside my tent, was a small, intricately carved wooden bird. It was clearly handmade, whittled from a piece of pale birchwood, its details surprisingly delicate. It was a beautiful object, but in this context, it felt like the most menacing thing I had ever seen. It was a trophy, a calling card. It was a statement from my stalker, an acknowledgement that he knew I was aware of him and that the game had now begun. That was the end of my project. My passion for photography was gone, replaced by a desperate, animalistic need to survive. I packed up my camp in a frantic, panicked rush, my hands shaking so badly I could barely buckle the straps on my pack. I didn't care about the bears anymore. I just had to get out of those woods. The hike out was the most terrifying experience of my life. I knew, with every fiber of my being, that I was being followed. I could hear him, the soft snap of a twig just a moment after my own footfall, the faint rustle of leaves in the undergrowth, keeping a steady, patient pace with me. He wasn't trying to be completely silent. He wanted me to know he was there. It was a form of psychological torture, a way of breaking me down. At one point, I tried to catch him. On a switchback where the trail doubled back on itself, I suddenly ducked behind a large cluster of rocks and waited, my camera with its telephoto lens ready. I was going to get a picture of him. I was going to expose him. I waited for 5 minutes, my heart hammering against my ribs. I heard nothing. He was smarter than that. He knew the trail. He knew I would try something. I abandoned my ambush and continued my frantic hike. After what felt like an eternity, I reached the final long stretch of trail before the parking lot. It cut across a wide, open meadow, about a quarter of a mile of exposed ground with no cover. This was it. This was my chance. If he followed me across this meadow, I would see him. He would be exposed. I walked as fast as I could across the open space, not daring to look back. The feeling of his eyes on my back was a physical thing, a burning pressure. When I finally reached the safety of the tree line on the other side, I spun around, brought my camera up to my eye, and zoomed my telephoto lens all the way in. I scanned the edge of the woods I had just emerged from, my hands shaking, and then I saw him. He was standing just inside the shadows, partially hidden by the trunk of a large maple tree. He was gaunt, impossibly thin, with long, matted hair. He was wearing tattered rags that might have once been hiking clothes. His skin was pale, almost translucent, and he was just standing there, watching me. His face was a blank, emotionless mask. As soon as he saw my lens pointed at him, as soon as he knew that I had seen him, he simply took one step back and melted into the shadows of the forest, vanishing completely. I didn't wait to see if he would reappear. I ran the rest of the way to the trailhead, threw my gear in my car, and drove away without looking back. I drove straight to the nearest park ranger station and told him my story. I sounded like a madwoman, I'm sure, but the terror in my voice was real. They sent a team of rangers to search the area. They found the abandoned fire tower, my base camp, and the strange, carved wooden bird, but they found no sign of the man. It was as if he had been a ghost. I thought I at least had the photograph, the one piece of hard evidence. But when I got home and loaded the pictures onto my computer, the one file, The one shot I had taken of him from across the meadow was corrupted. It was just a blur of gray and green digital noise, a meaningless jumble of pixels. I don't take pictures in the woods anymore. I can't. The sanctuary I once found in the wilderness is gone forever, replaced by the memory of that pale, silent figure in the trees. The psychological impact was permanent. The worst part wasn't the fear of being attacked. It was the chilling intelligence of it all. This wasn't some wild beast. This was a man who had shed his humanity and become a predator, a patient, observant hunter who had made the deep woods his own private hunting ground. He didn't want my camera or my gear. He didn't even seem to want to harm me, not yet. He was studying me, learning my patterns, just as I had studied the animals. He was a photographer of a different kind, and for 3 terrifying days, I had been his unwilling subject. My name is Jacob, and I'm a trail runner, or I was. For me, it was never just about fitness. It was about speed, about pushing my limits, about moving through the wilderness with a fluid efficiency that made me feel powerful, alive. I was young, arrogant, and I believed I was invincible, a master of my own body and the rugged terrain I loved to conquer. The mountains of the Pacific Northwest were my playground, and I knew their trails like the back of my hand. I had a deep and foolish confidence that no matter what the mountain threw at me, I was faster, stronger, and smarter. One run on the trail I had completed a dozen times taught me that there are forces in this world that do not care about your speed or your strength. Forces that operate on a scale of time and reality that can shatter a person's mind. The trail was a brutal 20-mile loop in the Olympic National Park, a place known for its moss-draped, old-growth forests and its notoriously fickle weather. The forecast for the day was clear in the morning, with a chance of fog rolling in late in the afternoon. I figured I could be up and back long before then. I was aiming to beat my personal best time, and I set off from the trailhead at a blistering pace, my ego a burning fuel in my chest. The first few hours were glorious. I moved through the forest like a ghost, my feet finding their rhythm on the soft, damp earth. I felt invincible. Around noon, as I was reaching the highest point of the loop, I noticed the first wisps of fog drifting through the trees below me. I checked my watch. I was making incredible time. I would be back at the car long before the fog became a problem. I ignored the warning signs and pushed harder. The arrogance of youth, a dangerous and blinding drug. The fog didn't roll in. It attacked. It surged up the mountainside with an unnatural, predatory speed, a thick, white wall that swallowed the world in an instant. One minute I was running under a clear blue sky. The next, I was in a disorienting, featureless gray void. The visibility dropped to less than 5 feet. The trail, which had been so clear just moments before, vanished completely. The temperature plummeted and a deep, chilling silence fell. The fog so thick it seemed to be absorbing all sound. Panic, an emotion I hadn't felt on a trail in years, began to set in. I slowed to a walk, my hands outstretched, trying to feel for the edge of the path. I checked my GPS watch, my one piece of modern security. The screen just showed a jumble of static-filled lines. No signal. I was blind, deaf, and completely, utterly lost. I tried to backtrack, but I had no idea which direction I had come from. Every direction looked the same, a swirling, uniform gray. The arrogance I had felt just an hour before had curdled into a cold, raw fear. I was just another lost fool on the mountain. I started walking, choosing a direction at random, hoping to stumble upon a landmark I recognized. I wandered for what felt like hours. The fog was a living thing, its cold, wet tendrils clinging to my skin. As dusk began to settle, turning the gray world into a darker, more menacing shade of gray, I started to hear things. Faint whispers carried on the non-existent wind. They were sibilant, hushed sounds, like a conversation happening just on the edge of my hearing. The words were in a language I didn't recognize, a series of clicks and soft, guttural sounds. I told myself it was just the sound of water dripping, my own frantic breathing, my mind playing tricks on me in the disorienting fog. The forest I was walking through began to feel wrong. The familiar, moss-covered firs of the Pacific Northwest seemed to be replaced by trees that were taller, darker, with strange, twisted branches that looked like grasping arms in the fog. The ground under my feet felt different, too, soft and spongy, like I was walking on a carpet of moss that was miles deep. Exhausted and on the verge of collapse, I stumbled into a clearing. And in the center of the clearing, I saw something that did not belong there, something that could not possibly exist. It was a single monolithic obelisk of perfectly smooth black stone. It stood about 10 feet tall, a flawless geometric shape that had no place in the wild, chaotic world of the forest. Its surface was not wet from the fog. It was completely dry and seemed to absorb the light around it, making it appear like a hole in reality. Faint, intricate geometric patterns were carved into its surface, and they were glowing with a soft, internal blue-green light. A low, resonant hum emanated from the stone, a vibration that I could feel in the soles of my feet and the fillings of my teeth. I stood there, staring at it, my fear momentarily replaced by a sense of profound, terrifying awe. This was impossible. It was a dream, a hallucination brought on by exhaustion and hypothermia, but it felt real. The air around it was warmer, and the whispering sounds were louder here, seeming to come directly from the humming stone. I don't know what compelled me to do it. Some desperate primal need for contact, for something solid in this world of gray shapelessness. I reached out my hand and I touched it. The surface was not cold like stone should be. It was warm, almost hot, and it vibrated with an intense energy. The moment my fingers made contact, the glowing patterns on its surface flared brightly, and the humming intensified into a deafening roar that filled my head. The world dissolved into a blinding flash of white light, and then nothing. The next thing I knew, I was waking up. I was lying on the soft, mossy ground at the base of the obelisk. It was dawn. The fog was completely gone, and the sky was a clear, brilliant blue. The obelisk was no longer glowing, no longer humming. It was just a silent black stone in the morning light. I felt strangely fine. I wasn't cold, I wasn't hungry, I wasn't tired. I felt rested, energized even. My watch was broken, the screen dark and lifeless. I looked around, and through the trees, I could see the familiar shape of a ridge I recognized. The trail was less than 100 yards away. I found the path easily and started walking back towards the trailhead. The sense of disorientation was gone. The woods were just the woods again. I felt a strange sense of unreality, as if the events of the previous day had been a bizarre and vivid dream. The only proof it had happened was my broken watch and the strange, lingering feeling of warmth in my fingertips. When I reached the trailhead, I was met with a scene of chaos. There were 3 park ranger vehicles, a sheriff's department car, and a small group of people in bright orange vests, a search and rescue team. A woman with a clipboard saw me, and her eyes went wide. She ran towards me, speaking frantically into a radio. "He's here! We've got him! He just walked out of the woods!" I was confused. I told them I was fine, that I had just gotten turned around in the fog and had to spend one night on the mountain. The woman, the search team leader, just stared at me. "Son," she said, her voice a mixture of relief and disbelief. "You've been missing for 3 days." I didn't believe her. It was impossible. I had a clear memory of the fog rolling in, of wandering for a few hours, of finding the clearing, and of waking up the next morning. One night, that was all, but she showed me the date on her phone. It was Tuesday morning. I had started my run on Saturday. There were 2 full days of my life that were completely, utterly gone from my memory. I tried to tell them about the clearing, about the obelisk. I was frantic, desperate to prove that I wasn't crazy. A team of rangers went with me, following my directions. But when we got to the place I remembered, there was no clearing. There was no obelisk. There was just a dense, unbroken stand of ancient, old-growth forest, a place where no clearing could have possibly existed. They looked at me with a mixture of pity and suspicion. The official story became that I had suffered from a severe case of hypothermia-induced delirium, that I had found a cave or a hollow log to shelter in, and that my mind had fabricated the rest. I was medically cleared, but I knew that something was wrong. I felt different. The crippling exhaustion I should have felt after 3 days lost in the wilderness never came. I no longer seemed to feel the cold. I could stand outside in a t-shirt in freezing weather and feel perfectly comfortable, and the nightmares started. They were not nightmares of being lost in the fog. They were vast, silent dreams of floating in the infinite black emptiness between stars, of seeing worlds born and die in a blink of an eye. About a week after my rescue, I was getting out of the shower when I saw it in the mirror. Faint, almost invisible in the normal light, but there, on my chest and arms, just under the surface of my skin, were a series of delicate, glowing blue-green lines. They were the same intricate geometric patterns I had seen on the surface of the obelisk. I was never really lost on that mountain. I was found. Something ancient and unknowable, something that sleeps in the heart of the stone and dreams of the stars, found me. I don't know what it did to me during those 2 missing days. I don't know what it put inside of me. I only know that I wasn't just rescued from the mountain. A part of the mountain was rescued in me. And now I carry its silent cosmic dream with me, a walking, breathing mystery, forever changed by the fog, by the whispers, and by the thing that waits patiently in the heart of the forest for the next lost soul to stumble upon its door. The stories you just heard share a common, chilling thread. They are born from the deep, primal fear of isolation, of what happens when the familiar comforts of our world are stripped away and we are left alone with the vast, silent indifference of nature. These accounts from Alex, Maya, and Jacob are stark reminders that the wilderness operates by its own set of rules. And sometimes, those rules are utterly terrifying and beyond our comprehension. They show us that a place of beauty can become a place of dread, that the feeling of being watched can be more than just paranoia, and that getting lost can sometimes mean being found by something you were never meant to encounter. While it's impossible to prepare for the truly inexplicable, there are practical steps every hiker can take to stay safe. Always tell someone your exact route and your expected return time. Carry a reliable navigation device like a GPS and a backup map and compass. Pack more food, water, and warm layers than you think you'll need. A personal locator beacon can be a literal lifesaver in a true emergency. These are the tools that give you a fighting chance when things go wrong. Awareness is your most crucial piece of gear. Listen to your instincts. If a place feels wrong, if your gut is telling you to turn back, then turn back. But as these stories prove, some fears can't be packed away or planned for. Some mysteries are not meant to be solved. The wilderness holds secrets older than humanity, and sometimes we are just trespassers who are unfortunate enough to stumble upon them. What do you think was out there with these hikers? Have you ever had an unsettling experience on a trail, a moment of unexplained fear, or a strange encounter you couldn't rationalize away? Share your own stories and theories in the comments below, because sometimes the only comfort we can find is in knowing we are not the only ones who have looked into the deep woods and felt its shadows looking back. And if you reached this far, tell me where are you watching from and what time it is, subscribe and like the video.